Good evening, everyone. Good evening, friends. Good evening, students. Good evening, colleagues. Uh, Wonderful to see you all. Um, this is our first event for the fall semester of the Alberto Italian Studies Institute. So nice to see so many of you. I think I recognize pretty much all of you. So I'm not going to say if you're new to our events, go and sign up for the sign up sheet because I think you all come to pretty much all of our events. So thank you. Thank you very much to all of you for being here. I'm just going to give very few remarks because I want to leave the podium and the microphone to my colleague David Bénéteau, who is going to talk to us about his latest scholarly production. But I want to remind you that that we have several events. One of them, the date has changed, so please be aware of that. The scholarship event, and where we're going to have a speaker of Dr. We have Matteo Brera, who is here, and who is the Marie Curie fellow visitor for this semester. It's no longer October 9th, it's October 7th. So please take note of that and hope to see you on Monday, October 7th for that event. Also, that was not sent on Save the Date. We have an additional speaker. The Italian writer Dacia Maraini will be joining us on November 18th. I hope that you will join us for that very special event that we host here at Seton Hall. Now, without any further ado, just one last reminder for students to sign up if you want to get credit for this participation. I know that you don't care about those kind of things, but you know, why not getting credit for something that you're doing? Please join me in welcoming the Dean of the School of Arts and Science, Dr. Jonathan Farina, who will do the proper introduction to our speaker tonight, and who also is as it was for the event where you came to introduce and the translation that I did of Edith Bruck is also always had these wonderful insights that he gives to our events. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Farina, and who will introduce Dr. Bénéteau.
Thank you, Gabriella, and thank you for setting up the expectations. I didn't do any remarks. Thank you all for coming. This is our first event for the Italian Studies Institute, and you should really be, I mean, we're quite fortunate to have had book launch after book launch after book launch after book launch for a small group of faculty. You know, it's 3 Italian full-time faculty, and we've had as many books in the past couple of years. So it's really impressive and something to be in awe of, and I'm very excited to be their dean for the time speaking. I hope you transfer some of the energy from tonight and from all this work back into your other communities when you get home. As you know, languages are suffering from less attention than they used to have. So I hope you go back and especially talk to young people about the importance of studying languages in other cultures and about the joy it brings later in life. Everyone, and especially everyone in this room, reaches for Rome in different ways and for different reasons. So whether you're on vacation or studying abroad, on Duolingo, or in the pages of a novel, the Leopard maybe, in movies watching Gladiator, or on television watching White Lotus, one of my recent favorites, we grasp for our own histories, the historical roots of our families, in the case of many of us here who are immigrants of Italian ancestry, or in the case of everyone in this room, for the historical roots of our government, our language, our philosophy, our religion, our science, and our culture. We feel nostalgia and recognition in the idioms, the architecture, the landscapes and mythologies, the gestures, laws, styles of dressing and living and thinking that we find in Italy. They are lost but not forgotten, familiar but also otherworldly. Rome affords historical depth to our everyday lives. From the font on my page to to the architecture of this building, not this room, I should add, but the faux exterior of this building. The study of this other culture provides depth to that which we see every day. Today, we will hear about the discovery and translation of the True Roman Histories, a manuscript from 1313 that recounts episodes about the Roman Republic from its establishment with Romulus and Remus through the Roman Civil War. We moderns tend to take for granted that books are published and meant to be read by a living audience of readers. Even a small audience of readers, in the case of my book, perhaps just my family who wouldn't actually read the book, but who would at least purchase it. But medieval manuscripts, like some books, were also written for posterity, for personal, spiritual, or humanistic education, for vanity and display, for gifts, and for many other reasons never meant to be published broadly. So if the title True Roman Histories implies for us that the preceding histories were flawed, as Edward Gibbon, to take a shining example, claimed that Tacitus and Livy were wrong, and as we criticize Gibbon in return for being inaccurate in his own ways, the title also nods to other kinds of truth for other kinds of audiences. What's true, perhaps, about the history of Rome for the author of this manuscript, Lapo de Neri Corsini, is that right, Lapo? Lapo de Neri Corsini might have more to do with how Rome touches and matters to that early 14th century youngest son of a wool manufacturer than it does with what really happened on the Italian peninsula from, say, 400 to 1 AD. Just as our true histories of Rome have less to do with what the historical fine points of Tacitus and Livy and Virgil and Gibbon and more have to do with our personal aesthetic commitments, our family stories, our travel experiences, and cultural attachments. There's different true histories for each of us. And today, David Bénéteau, professor of Italian in the Department of Languages, Literatures, and Cultures, will therefore recount as much about the life of Lapo de Neri, the author of this manuscript, as about the content of his history of Rome. David has been at Seton Hall since 1992. He grew up in Italy and lived 10 years in Canada, getting his BA from McGill, and hence his special interest in Italian translations of Old French, though he didn't learn Old Italian and Old French. He's not that old. David earned his Ph.D. at the University of California, Berkeley. He is the editor and translator of now 3 different books, including The Ceramist's Secrets for 2005 and The Deeds of the Romans in 2012. He is also the author of numerous scholarly articles on medieval and Renaissance Italian culture. David has been a fellow at Via de Tati, the Harvard Center for Italian Renaissance Studies in Florence. He has been a participant in the Humanities Seminar on Italian Paleography at the Newberry Library in Chicago. He has been a Wuhan scholar in China, and he speaks an impressive number of languages: Italian, French, German, Chinese, Spanish, and English. As he will tell you, he speaks none of them particularly well. I affirm the comment about English. But it's better than my French. Among many accomplishments at Seton Hall, David has served as chair of the Faculty Senate, and he is a winner of the Hakim Medal for Faculty Service. He participated in the founding of and the fundraising for the Valente Library of Italian books upstairs, as well as the creation of the Lamada Chair in Italian Studies, and he indeed helped hire Bill Connell and Gabriella Romani in this room, among other faculty. Without further ado, I'm very pleased to present Dr. David Bénéteau on the discovery and publication of the True Roman Histories by Lapo de Neri Corsini. David.
Is it good? Yeah. Okay. I'm flattered by this introduction. It's a little loud. I guess I'm a little loud. I am delighted to be here. I guess I need that. I'm delighted to be here tonight. Thank you. To celebrate the publication of this book with friends and students, The True Roman History. When you accomplish something big like this, you feel joy. I want to share the discoveries. I want to share that feeling tonight and thank the many people who contributed to it. So I'm going to tell you how a book project like this starts. I'm a Roman philologist. I'm sorry, Romance philologist. Philologist sounds like a complicated word, but philo just means I love. And logos just means words. And I love words. I love stories. I deal with Italian, French texts. I read them in books, manuscripts. Manuscripts are handwritten books that contain these stories. I also love libraries. And when I go to a library, I try to find a manuscript that hasn't yet been published. And so every manuscript, unlike a printed book, has its own history. Its author, scribes, illustrators, readers, owners. I make it legible to recount its history to future readers, knowledge about the past, about the language used, and the stories told. And I discovered a treasure. Manuscript Hamilton 67, dated 1313 in the Berlin State Library in Germany. When a manuscript has not yet been published, it's because it's either too long, and so it's too advanced for a graduate student, or a professor seldom has the time to do it, or it's in poor condition, as in this one. Here, the first page is gone, and this is the second page, and the second page is badly damaged by water, as you see at the bottom of it. You see here? It's almost illegible. 20 years ago, I thought this was impossible. I saw this 20 years ago, and I thought it was impossible. Since then, a few manuscripts have appeared containing text similar to this, and so I thought I'd give it a try. I went to Seton Hall research grant and went to Berlin. Berlin's a beautiful city. Here's the synagogue. So here's the synagogue. See the synagogue there? It's also one of the museum capitals of the world. This is Gigantomachy. It's a war between gods and giants. It's 2,000 years old. When you go to a museum like this, you wonder, like, how do you feel about this? It filled me with awe and wonder to be there. So I went to work on this manuscript using ultraviolet light in 2021. And so I don't know if you can might be able to read the top. It says, here the Romans decided to how to undo Carthage. How to undo it. So they'd won the war already, but they decided how to undo it, how to wreck it once and for all. And so it starts here, basically. So I use an ultraviolet light to read. So in theory, the ink comes out of the paper. Even though you don't see it, there's a little iron used in the ink. And so you put ultraviolet light to it. In theory, if it's dark, then it should appear in some way that way. I could still barely read it, but I guessed well. And the book came out. The book came out last December. So every book you edit has to be described in detail. So also become a historian, and an art historian, and a linguist, and a paleographer. You have to learn a bunch of different skills to do something like this. I worked in the archives of Florence. The writer Lapo, son of Neri Corsini, was a scribe. He was simply copying down what he had in front of him. He never went to school. The schools in the Middle Ages, of course, were in monasteries. The notaries and merchants learned to write at home, as this man most certainly did. He was the youngest son of a rich merchant family, a member of the Wool Guild. Do you know what the guild is? It's like the union, and only this group, only the social group was allowed to make the sale. You have to be a member of the guild, or you may not sell that. And so, like a corporation, a union of some kind. The family moved to Florence in the 1100s from Poggibonsi. This is just north of Siena. They owned land there, and they owned many sheep. Their wool became textiles, and their profit turned the family into bankers. So a dress like this from the 16th century would have cost about as a car now. Okay, so almost nobody would have owned something like this. It would have been fantastically expensive. Also, manuscripts were written on a sheep's skin, on parchment. That's what parchment is sheep's skin. And so each page is one skin of sheep. And so the total size of the book is 128 pages. And so 128 sheep gave their lives to tell this story. So when the family moved to Florence, they lived in Oltrarno. Oltrarno just means on the other side of the river. It's now a romantic part of town. Here you have to sharpen your elbows to get to the parapet to make a picture like this. This is Piazzale Michelangelo. Then it was probably a rough part of town. Oltrarno was probably a rough part of town in those days. So each family probably needed its own tower for protection. So you don't see this so much now because, first of all, most of them were cut down, knocked down. But second of all, because they'd be incorporated in buildings. Okay, and so if you own a building like this, you're going to add a balcony to it, and you add windows to it. Naturally, the tower would not have windows, and the balcony would be a laughable concept. You'd keep water in there and keep enough food in there. Hopefully, you could survive for 3 months. It's very, very hard to conquer if it's made of stone. We're coming back to stone in a second. And so this is the address where the Corsini lived. The address is still there. It's been rebuilt many times. The whole block, once in wood, the houses were made in wood, were burned down in a revolt in the late 14th century against the wealthy families. The revolt was made by the wool workers. They demanded a say in their treatment and pay. It was actually houses, not a house. It was actually a group of houses. A group of houses for the family and staff where they also worked. You would work there, you'd sleep there, and you protect it. And you could rent out the bottom floor. And so you could store your wares there. And so here's my favorite. This is the family church, San Feliciano. See if you remember that. San Feliciano. It's 40 yards away from the house. The facade hasn't really changed that much. It's Romanesque, very, very lovely, very simple. Romanesque. The wealthy father, Neri Corsini, wanted to be buried in a chapel in the Augustinian convent nearby, which became the glorious church of Santo Spirito a century later. The convent was here, kind of still is here, and so they built the church on top of it. Unfortunately, it can't be found anymore. I went and I looked and I looked and I looked. You can't find the father. The family's youngest son, Lapo, son of Neri, had a huge job that must have taken him a year, a whole year, to write a history of Rome from its foundation, conquest over Celts in Spain, slave rebellions, Hannibal's crossing of the Alps with elephants, up to the Roman Civil War and the murder of the dictator Julius Caesar. War, fires, hostage takings, eruptions, plagues, naval battles, shipwrecks, thirst, starvation, and celestial events are key moments in the narration. And at times it's even gruesome. Cruel Roman soldiers crucify enemies and slaves and torment their prisoners. This is a prisoner. He's tied up, has beard pulled. Gallic women commit mass suicide rather than letting their bodies become Roman property. In this story, after killing her children, after strangling her children, the woman kills herself and then is imitated by her husband, and he holds her up like this. No. The Roman built this as a celebration of their victory over the Gallic. So we're going to return to the function of the book. But one thing is certain. This manuscript, Hamilton 67, was written to honor and exalt the culture of this merchant family. It is richly illustrated and designed to remain open on a table in those houses. I refer to this as asserting the power of prestige. Imagine in a business meeting, your clients would come over, and you show that book and tell them, oh, my son wrote that. Looking pretty good. In Italian, we call that libro di rappresentanza. In English, the best word we come up with is a coffee table book. Meant to be admired, maybe not read, and certainly not touched. This probably King Mithridates, ruler of the Near East. Do you see, by the way, how the soldier is twice as big as a horse? Have you ever seen a horse? Horses are bigger than people. Let me inform you of this fact. This probably is the ruler of the Near East. He tells a time when the Rome tries to gain control of all the known world. His story is that he took such care about being poisoned that he couldn't even kill himself by poison. And so he has to ask a soldier of his to cut his head off, to commit suicide for himself in that way. So the illustration gets more and more intricate with rich colors, very, very rich colors. You see, blue is the most expensive color. Blue costs a fortune. Red ain't cheap, but the blue in particular. Rich colors, and this is historiata. And historiata means that it tells the story. The picture tells the story. And so what happens here is, and I use this for the book cover, the Romans, they trick the Carthaginians. They're allies at this time. After their victories, they've become allies. They tell them that they need their weapons against a common enemy. The allies give them. Do you still give them? They give them here? They're willingly given their weapons. Then the Romans tell them that they must move their city a mile away from where it is now and rebuild it. They will refuse, and the Romans will burn the city walls down, spread lime all over it, so that they cannot rebuild it there. And this is a true story. They will build a Roman colony, now in modern-day Tunisia, Roman Carthage, which in the 4th century became Roman Empire's second biggest city. Augustine of Hippo studied there. A final look at these illustrations. For some illustrations, it's Lapo taking liberties. I suspect having fun. I think this was a windy day. I suspect either he had food poisoning or he had too much to drink the day before. It's fairly easy to do this. If you try to imitate something like this, it's something that you can do. Just take a pencil and take a couple colors and just try to imitate it. It should take 5 minutes. You can do something like this. It looks complicated, but it isn't. The scholars here, we're pulling each other's hair out, our beautiful hair, out this, discussing, did he really do this? This is historiata, this is a little story, okay? And so the king is captured, and he's brought from Africa by boat, and this is event number 1. The boat brings the king is tied up, his hands are tied up behind him. They bring him by horse, and then they bring him up to the arch, and you know what happens next? They kill him, but throwing him head down, tied up off an arch of some kind. There's let's not talk about death now. The miniatures, and what all miniatures is a painter skilled at producing very small illustrations, which the family hired, probably didn't know the artistic traditions. And so here are other examples from other more glorious traditions. This is actual gold leaf. This is gold. So you take gold and you hammer it super, super thin, but it really creates, this is actual gold gold. It doesn't look gold. It is gold. This is French. These are, this one is princesses watching their heroes joust. And I think you recognize that this is German. Martin von Klingen. This is late 14th century, maybe early 15th century. Look at the magnificent colors. Look at the details. You see the expressive faces of the women. Colorful battles. This one in Siena. This, unfortunately, is in poor condition. This is a magnificent manuscript. It's in Siena. Intricate ink, typical of religious texts. And so this is relatively simple. So this is A. But let me just go back at this. Do you see the A here? Do you see what I'm saying? Intricate? That would take you a while to do something like that. And this is a typical of religious texts. So there's a tradition of illustrations like this, so you can follow from one area to another. These are some of my favorites. These are beautiful French. This shows third dimensional skill that also tells the story. So we're going to come to this picture. We're going to talk about this in a second. This is French. And here is 35. This is magnificent. This was 15th century. This was a gift for a prince of France. One of the princes of France do this. Anybody read French? Any French lovers? Someone want to try? I know it looks fantastically hard, but it actually isn't. I have students that reading their handwriting is harder than reading this. Yes, and I get accused of this. Paleography just means reading old. It's actually not that hard. Matt, do you want to try? Si commence. Here begins the history of Rome. And first of all, premièrement, de la nativité, correct? The birth of Romulus and Remus, and how they were fed, comment il faut nourrir, et échapper de mort, and how they escaped death by the will of God, de Dieu. And that's another interesting issue that we can talk about if you want, because if this is Christian, then why are we talking about the gods? We can talk about after if you want. And so I believe this is a gold frame. I believe this is gold. Okay, and here there's anachronism. As I tried to teach this to my students. Anachronism, who sees it? I ask my students, you're not a student. If you're a student, I don't remember.
Something out of time.
Angelo. So the time doesn't fit. The time doesn't fit. And so what doesn't fit here? The clothing is ridiculous, right? There's Romulus and Remus, and they're wearing 15th century French outfits. And this a workman? The workmen are wearing these like fancy clothes. And so they're definitely showing up. They're wearing, they have expensive blue to show off they want to use this. I have a little blue left over. Guess what? I'm going to paint it. I don't care what it looks like. It's magnificent, magnificent, fantastic. This is probably in goat skin. The ship skin lasts longer, and it's thinner and it's softer. It also feels better. And to think that something like this can last after 600 years, how something can stay this good is amazing. You know, the quality. It is unbelievable. So back to Lapo. Enough of this. Remember what I said, that he had no schooling? That means that his handwriting is unique. And so here's a smoking gun. By matching his handwriting, signed in this manuscript, dated 1310, where are we? 1000, 111, 10, dated 1310, with this one, which is my book, 1313, 1000, she's 100. 13. By matching these two, we are able to identify that he wrote this book. And this is a fantastic news. And so, does somebody see it? Do you see the last line? E and scritto, written. This abbreviation, there's only one abbreviation, per, and written per, and this is English. Me. Written by me, scritto per me. And here's his name, here he signs it, Lapo di Neri Corsini. He actually signs it here. This is an extremely valuable, exciting discovery for the person who discovered this. It wasn't me. But remember what I said about the church? Remember what San Feliciano is the name of the church? He says it here. Del popolo San Felice. He writes Felice. He probably makes a typo of some kind. It's kind of interesting. So I made various discoveries about Lapo. There's no record of his birth, although there is no record of his birth. Judging by his father's and his children's birth dates, he must have been born around 1280, meaning he was in his 30s when he sat down to write his magnum opus. He was a contemporary of Dante. And so imagine walking down Florence and running into Dante. Imagine what that might have done. So why would he not have met Dante in this era? No. I'm sorry, I didn't say that question right. At this time, the Battistero exists. The Battistero is from the 13th century. But at night there was curfew. You weren't allowed to go out at night. You only go out at night to rob something. The curfew was completely out of the question. There was curfew. You were not allowed to go out, so it's definitely not. Now that it seems like the students have a curfew, now day curfew. They only show up at night for some reason here, but then we're not going to talk about that now. He had 8 children. He had 8 surviving children. And so if you think that 25% of children died before the age of 1, they probably, that's 11 is probably more likely. Not uncommon for a wealthy man. He lived in the family house in Via Baggio with his cousins. He died around the age of 50. Not unusual. Just 4 years after his father, who lived a long, rich life. The story of the Corsini family is celebrated. They started occupying all the major political positions in Florence, from consuls to different guilds, the Silk Guild, for example, and started occupying positions in the church also. They became major bankers. They built these glorious homes on the Arno River. This is Casa Corsini, and naturally in Rome. This on the Trastevere, which means on the other side of the river. This is Museo Corsini, and this is the back of it. We should invent a new word for the back door. I think it doesn't do just to this word. A cousin of Lapo had a good career. He became Bishop of Florence and became a saint. You see, Saint Andrew Corsini. Maybe the most famous Corsini was a pope, Clement XII, in the 18th century. Lawyer, accomplished violinist, book and art collection. Look at this lovely, lovely portrait by Agostino Masucci. I'll do something for art history because I learned something about art history doing this. He is imitating the portraits of other popes. And among the most famous ones was Raffaello. And he's trying to imitate it. And so look at the sensational, the lace, but look at the, how it goes on the chair. Like the fringe of this. And this is there's just a little bit of it, but the Pope has a gold bell that he rings when he wants help. Little gold bell. He wants to include that also. It's a lovely, lovely portrait. He looks modest somehow. It's very, very realistic. I like this a lot. I didn't know this Agostino Masucci, but I like it a lot. This Pope opened the Capitoline Museum to the public. He funded the rebuilding of the Trevi Fountain. He funded it. He paid for it. He never saw it. He died because it's finished. But you see it up here? Clement XII, Clemente XII. He lived on Piazza Navona until exchanging these humble apartments for these views from Pope Castel Sant'Angelo. So, scholars, we're still asking ourselves what the purpose of telling Roman history in the medieval world was. Is medieval Italy trying to connect to the Roman Empire? To claim that Florentines, as Romans, are heirs to the legacy or triumphs of the Roman Empire? Is it a history lesson? Or in part as entertainment? For example, along with the horror, the gory parts, which in the Middle Ages, they like that gory, they like that blood. They like les viscere, the body parts are coming out in the battles. Along with that, there's some romance. The tryst of Cleopatra, should I say no more. I'm thinking this over for about 20 years. I've come to a different hypothesis. So in this book, there's a great interest in geography. In reality, in the Middle Ages, few traveled. From Rome to Naples, for example, if you owned a horse, it'd probably take you a week. Bologna to Florence, you would probably not go in the winter. You'd have to cross the mountains. You probably wouldn't go in the winter, even with a horse. That'd probably take about a week. Crossing the Alps in the winter was out of the question. This is flooding of Florence in 1966. This type of flooding was common until about 100 years ago. This flooding. Look at this. This is a stop sign, and look closely. It's a car floating. Okay, cars. 1966, right? We're not talking 1400. Even crossing a river was potentially life-threatening. In the winter, only a fool would go anywhere and stay home. That's, by the way, this is why Italian dialects are or were so different from each other. Have you noticed this? It's not easy to communicate with each other if you have to cross the river to go meet someone. Isoglossa is the technical word for it. But this was the period when merchants did travel. They went from the rich wool areas in northern Europe, where it's cold, the sheep, they give the thicker wool. And so you get your wool here, and then you bring it down to the east here, all the pigments. Merchants do travel from the rich wool in northern Europe to the fine pigments in the Near East. They make luxurious, colorful textiles. French was the language of business. The biggest fair was in Lyon, France. So let's look at the authors before Lapo, who wrote about Roman history. Orosius, in the 4th and 5th century, was a Spaniard priest. He lived in the dying throes of the Roman Empire with the Vandals at the door, literally. So he traveled from Spain to Africa, to meet Augustine of Hippo. Many people believe that Augustine wanted him to write this book, History of the Pagans. And then he went to Jerusalem, which is a long way. So that would take 3 months by boat, something like this, approximately. We don't know for sure whether he even made it back to Spain. But his history book, History Against Pagans, you see it? 7 books of history against pagans. Yeah, you can see that up here. Has an extremely accurate knowledge of geography, Africa in particular. In the early 13th century, the French book L'Histoire ancienne jusqu'à César, Ancient History, the source of this book was written in Belgium. Let me go back. Yeah, was written in Belgium, near the French border today, there. It became well known. It's found its way all the way to the Holy Land, where the Crusaders, here, the Crusaders were in their last failing attempt at the end of the 13th century to hang on to their castles. Perhaps they could also benefit from the geographic and military information enclosed, maybe. These places named in this book needed a map. And the modern technology of Google Maps can give us a precise geolocation. So I and two librarians at Seton Hall, whom I thank profusely, Sama Arish. Sama, raise your hand. Thank you so much. And Maria Barca, you, Maria? Put together a series of maps with ancient and somewhat funny pictures and placed them within 40 meters of where they once were. So look at these two. Okay, this is an ancient map of Sicily. Okay, so it's right, that's triangle. And the names are right. And so here's the modern one. We use the names that are in the text, but we place them within 40 meters of each other. That's what you can do nowadays. So any Sicilians here? Sicilians? Angelo again? Angelo, where's Palermo? Do you say Carmela? Anybody see Palermo? Do you see it? It's here. It's called Panormus. Does somebody know what this could mean? Pan means everything. Ormos, ormeggiare means to, where you can throw the anchor. So it's, the name of the city is a city where you can throw the anchor anywhere. It means it's a fantastic place to ship. There's a beautiful, beautiful port. There's two rivers that come in. That's the name of Palermo. So there's this one, and the one that I point out is Drepanus, it's modern Trapani. And my favorite, Lilibeo, look where it is. Lilibeo. So here's Panormo in Italian. Here's Drepani, Trapani. And here's Lilibeo. So what's Lilibeo? So it's the western tip of Sicily. So from there, first of all, 3 centuries before the modern era, before the common era, first of all. Second of all, it's there, the Carthage put it there. First of all, long before the Romans ever saw Sicily. But so, in theory, you can keep your eyes on Libya from there. You can keep the eye on Africa from there. You see people coming from afar. But it's a city nowadays. La città del vino, everybody knows it. Did you say it, Gabriella? And Marsala, la città del vino. Everybody knows Marsala. There's where it's La città del vino, for a reason, obviously. The title, The True Roman History, begs the question, why does the author have to insist that it's true? Is there political reason? Orosius, the late classical author of the Histories Against Pagans, argues that God writes history, that it's all preordained, refers to earthquakes and calamities as somehow wanted by God as a punishment of some kind. He and Augustine of Hippo once demonstrate that the adoption of Christianity as the official religion of the Roman Empire did not lead to its fall, which was going to happen momentarily, as the pagans insisted were to blamed. But was this thought valid 700 years later? And is it valid now, 700 years later? Was perhaps the idea to help a distressed humanity dealing with tragedy somehow? Think of the plague in Boccaccio. Maybe that's a separate argument, maybe. This story tells a different story of the foundation of Rome. Listen carefully. A vestal, meaning a nun, dedicated to gods, and therefore chastity, has twins. Her enraged father orders the babies thrown into the Tiber. The guards get to the water. They hear the babies laughing. So the soldiers just leave them by the river to the fate of gods, as we saw it earlier. They're rescued by a shepherd. So you see him here. Here's the shepherd. There's the babies. And here's his flock. And so they're right by the river, as you see. He brings them home to his wife. He's delighted to raise twins. Twins, lucky, right? To have two children, it's extra luck. Unfortunately, the story narrates that his beautiful wife is generous with her favors, disinvolta. So she deserves the nickname La Lupa, she-wolf. And the story says there's no animal wolf at all. And that's where this word and the myth of the wolf comes from. Now, look at this a little more closely. There is, in fact, a wolf. And it does seem to be a female. Now, is the wolf just eyeing the flock as the wolf had dinner? Is it looking at one of the sheep? Maybe he's distracted, he's going to have dinner here. Maybe the wolf was keeping her eye on the little tender Roman children. Guanciale, the rosy cheeks of the Roman. Lupanare in Italian still means bordello. Surely the Sicilian author Verda knew this version of the story in 1900. And so asking myself about the purpose of this book, I hunted for clues in different manuscripts in my favorite libraries. This is in Milan at the university. This is the inside. This was a hospital. This was one of the first hospitals in Europe in the 15th century. Then the three main libraries in Florence. The Riccardiana, where I first met Lapo. This is the inside. Mediceo Laurenziana. Michelangelo had to hide here for his life. For 3 months, he couldn't leave. The National Library manuscript room in Florence. And the Vatican Library. And then I came up with this hypothesis. Maybe Lapo, the youngest son, never left Florence. The merchant's family wanted wider markets, either ordered by his father or the necessity of business travel. And so maybe his two older brothers traveled, learned French and accounting, and he had to stay home and guard the business. He did have 8 children. I assure you he did not speak French. So perhaps Lapo's great interest in history and geography can be understood as a dream of his for a man who never left his home, a curiosity for mapping the world, a passion that he could only carry out in his library, reading books and writing and telling stories. His stories are always vivid, an imagination of the past, a quest for its veracity. As a scholar, as a philologist, who loved words. And in this, maybe Lapo's story is a bit like mine. I started working on manuscripts in my late 20s. He and I met at a library about 35 years ago in Florence. I dreamt of publishing a book that seemed out of reach. I followed my curiosity to all the libraries and manuscripts I had access to. I mapped out where his stories went. I took pictures of every bit of evidence I could find. I wanted to document this research. So in 22, as a nomadic scholar, I took pictures of where I went to find out. I worked in Milan. It's around the corner from where my sister lives. Here, Ambrose of Milan met Augustine here. I presented these results in Venice. This is Cadoro, the University of Venice. The Corsini, that business in Florence. In Venice, where textiles arrived and left. In Genova, scribes wrote their manuscripts here in this location. In Siena, excellent, excellent university, excellent libraries there. I presented in Padova, Galileo's university. I went to Pisa. In Pisa, Dr. Connells and my maestro Petrucci was there. And also by the river, the Arno. That's where you had to pass from Florence. There's only one way to get to the sea, and that's to go through Pisa. I lived 3 weeks in Bologna, this beautiful Portici, University Square. And this, by the way, also demonstrates of the flooding. Do you see how high it is off the street? Do you see how elevated it is off the street? It's for saving people's lives. Sometimes you needed this. This is University Square. So the Portici end here, this University Square, and there's the member of the conferees who were there that day. Then I was invited to Klagenfurt University in Austria. I lived a month in Navarra, much to the laughter of my publisher, who asked me, "What are you doing in the Wild West?" I was at the Henderson Library, of course, working on linguistics. Silly question. I visited every museum I got near. My sister lives in Boston, so I lived in Boston for a while. He's a friend of mine. She's a little older than I am. She's 950 years old. This in Mantova. And here's my favorite. This is a silver applique. So, who knows what an applique is? I know Petra was. Yeah. Do you want to say it? So it's about this big, and you put it against something. But this is silver. This is like real silver. So this is the expensive thing. So it would be like a handle for something. You would put it like on, if you had some expensive box of some kind, it would be like, but it would be exposed somehow. Presumably you want to wear something like this. It's too heavy. It's extremely interesting. If you're interested in art history and you're interested in how they make bronze, this is extremely interesting because you see some red in the face. Do you see they make him show like some blood after battle? Here, Achilles, having killed the queen of the Amazon with a spear, Penthesilea, falls in love with her. And he holds her dying body in his arms. Look at this beautiful this hand. Spoiler, that's my next book. The work we do as scholars is only possible by having the time and resources. Sabbatical funds for traveling to see and take images of the manuscripts, collaboration with fellow scholars, librarians, other teachers and students. So as I finish a work like this after 5 years, it took about 5 years, I want to take the time to thank the many who contribute. Tell our students, we're all students, you know. We're just a little more experienced than you are. Perhaps our research and results can be a good model for our students too. Thank you so much.